All right, we are live. We are live and on the scene. I am here with Shannon Myers. She's back again. How are you? How you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, yeah. Anytime, anytime. You're just like one of those people who just like has an open pass. There's just like come on anytime, even if you're like,
Okay.
yeah, if you feel like messaging me at 3 in the morning, like, hey, you want to do a podcast? Yeah, let's do a podcast. Let's do it.
Okay.
So, with that being said, we were messaging about this, I think just like a week or so ago, and you had made a mention that, doing therapy and doing counseling, that the holidays are your busiest time of the year.
Mhm.
And I got a pretty good guess as to why, but I'm really more interested in what the professional has to say about it.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of noticed that the holidays in the winter time, the winter months are just the busiest time of year. Seasonally, this is a time where, like even Celtic traditions, this is the hibernation period. I like to live my life seasonally, and so this is kind of the introspective period. Um, a lot of times, it has to deal with like December is always my biggest month. January too, because a lot of people are making some resolutions and some promises to themselves. But December, I've already worked with more people than like last month, by double, because just people are thinking about going home and visiting families, and they're healing or trying to heal, and they're really working on boundaries, or they're working on their health, or maybe they're leaving a toxic family system or whatever that is. So it ends up being a really, really stressful time of year for a lot of folks. Um, and a lot of deep introspection is just going on naturally. Seasonal affective disorder is really high. That actually hit early this year. I was seeing individuals with seasonal affective disorder in like September, which I normally don't see that until like December or January, February months, just because people have been at home and been in chronic stress for a long length of time. So for me, and my practice is a little bit different because I practice integrative medicine and not like, um, not like traditional types of workflow. So for me, it seems like more people are being more introspective. And then it compounds with their healing at some level, and they want to keep the healing going as they travel or deal with family, and then just all the stresses that come with the holidays. Yeah, holidays are not jolly for everyone. They're not. There's a lot of family dynamics that are going on, and it's a lot of high stress. Maybe kids are home. You're taking your PTO and you're driven to kind of the brink with kids at home and trying to figure out, how to get everything done.
Why is it? I should say, it amazes me that nobody can drive you more nuts than your own family. You know what I mean? Like from my personal perspective, I'm relatively good. I've got a pretty good family dynamic going, but it always amazes me, especially around holiday gatherings, how much more on edge people can get. Nobody can put you on edge more than, just like you said, like a toxic family member or something like that. I guess it's because, if you've got a friend and that, over the course of time that relationship is kind of sour, you can just kind of stop texting back and
Mhm.
you leave it be. But
Mhm.
when it's a family member, you still have to see multiple times a year, and I don't know what it is like that. You think it's just like grievances sort of fester and tend to boil up at points like that. Everybody kind of gets all. Have you ever been those? You ever been to like a family gathering where like everybody's just on edge,
Oh
and
yeah.
everybody's supposed to be there kind of like to relax and enjoy each other's company, and everybody's just like on the verge of cracking, and you get to the point, it's like there's this veneer of humanity that's over top of it, and it's just like, oh my god, only family can do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, families carry some of the deepest like intergenerational wounds, and you're not around them. Sometimes not. It depends on the family. Sometimes people are around each other all year long. Um, and it depends on the family situation, like if that's good or not, or toxic or what. The majority of families have problems. And the thing that I witness in my practice is I'm witnessing the first round of either parents or humans that are healing some of those generational wounds from their family system. And then they're going back into their family system and their family is saying, well, remember that time when you used to drink, or why aren't you eating this, or we're addicts in our family, so we're all going to drink, or we're all going to use, or they're kind of reminding you of past versions of yourself. And if you haven't built up enough time under your belt, enough time to practice those boundaries, the self-compassion and the self-care, the authenticity of like where you're at right now, it can be super triggering.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody knows how to trigger you more so than family. I mean, to me, I joke with my clients and like, there's nothing, the deepest spiritual practice you ever have in your life is just being around your family. Like, see how enlightened you are with like a weekend or a week with your family when you're trying to heal. Like, that's a deep, deep spiritual practice.
Mm-hmm. Gosh. Well, and I think sometimes you end up in these situations where, I mean, you obviously, of like the term like arrested development.
Yeah.
But I kind of think I've thought about this a lot in the past as sort of like, I don't know how you would classify it, more like arrested view. Like if you view somebody at a certain age and you've known them like as that person, and then as time moves forward, you see them rarely and rarely, it's real easy to just continue to remember them as that person they were at that one point in time, and have sort of struggled to take into account that that person's not living in a vacuum. They're not going into cryo storage and then coming out a year later when it's time for Christmas.
Right.
They're experiencing things and growing and changing, and I think sometimes is the ability to accept that and move on from that is really, really important as well.
It's tough because people get drawn back into those states. They get drawn back into those states and they start to feel like, I don't like how I am. We all have, so like internal family systems is a theory and a type of practice like that there's a lot of talk about like inner child healing, but there's all these different parts to us. There's all these different parts, and there's all these inner children that live within us. And so our family is like digging on a deep wound of like your 16-year-old self and that stupid thing you did. And a lot of families haven't learned how to actually truly connect with one another. And so we're doing a lot of bypassing there of like food, substances, gossiping, or just triggering one another, and just to have a fight in the form of this false connection, where we need to learn how to have hard conversations. We need to learn how to be able to let somebody grow and heal, even if they are breaking away from a cycle that has deeply existed within our family system. And that's really, really hard for the person, because there is the family system, the part of the family system, because there is some grief and loss, because they're actually mourning that the who they knew you to be at that age, that 16-year-old. So they're kind of mourning that because they were very connected with that, because that's kind of where they may still be at with themselves. And so there's some grief and loss there. But then on the other side, the person that's healing, they feel like, I can't go back into this family situation or system because I'm going to be held back at some level. And so it's constantly getting some support so you can find out who you are right now and be really authentic. And to be misperceived is okay with a family that just, maybe you're not around them enough. Maybe they don't have enough evidence to see that, oh, you have changed. It's just kind of this false connection with families that don't really have the tools to do that. I mean, my family, there's at least 2 therapists in our family, a counselor and a therapist in my family situation. So it's kind of like, oh boy, and a nurse, like 2 healthcare practitioners, frontline workers. So it's kind of like, yeah, we're going to talk about some stuff. But that's not, in my family system, we're the first generation to do that. That's not something where we grew up knowing how to do that intrinsically.
Yeah.
It's something that we have learned through our experience and our professions to be able to do.
Now, when you say intergenerational wounds, what, give me the background on that, because I kind of feel like I know where that's going, but.
So a lot of times people say, oh, it's my genetics. So epigenetics shows us, epigenetics is the layer beyond genetics, a lifestyle, environment, trauma, food, stress, all of the things that can turn on genes on or off. So like, let's just take diabetes, for example, and say, oh, it runs in the family. Diabetes runs in the family. So diabetes runs in the family. So everyone is just predisposed to getting diabetes. And so when you get diabetes, that's just what happens. Well, you can actually turn on and off some of those genes early. That's one example from a health front. And on another front is like alcoholism. It's like, oh, it just runs in the family. And it's kind of excused that it runs in the family. It's like, well, why is it running in the family? So these are intergenerational things that are occurring within family systems, or it could be, there could be child abuse in the family. There could be physical or emotional abuse in the family, or there could be cultural considerations that turn on epigenetic levers, or even religious trauma. These are just intergenerational things that have been passed on, and they look like, I have a book here, they look like personality traits or traits of a person, but it's trauma built within that family system. So you'll hear, oh, all of our family's anxious. We're all anxious. The book, My Grandmother's Hands, is a really great book. I'm trying to find, I have all of these books, just stacks everywhere.
It's not a bad problem.
It's next to my bed. That's why. So My Grandmother's Hand talks about just some intergenerational trauma that can exist. I have another book that just kind of talks about stress and just how that can intergenerationally look. And there are unique expressions of these things like ADHD, OCD, alcoholism, substance abuse. A lot of these things are genetic variants, but it's also exists within a family because there's a pattern of something going on within that family system. And I'm witnessing the first generation of individuals being cycle breakers, and they're breaking away. And so they end up looking like a black sheep, or I've been called eccentric, in my family. Yes. Because I, have been working on some things and not staying within the box of my own healing, so there can be cycle breakers that they take a lot of heat for healing. Families would be like, who do you think you are? You think you're better than the rest of us? And it's not that it's just a person has suffered so immensely that they will do anything, even putting boundaries in place with their family so that they're able to move forward on their healing path.
And boundaries is one of the hardest things. I think it's one of the hardest things to set. It's one of the hardest things to be understood, especially in your situation, like you were saying, where somebody is healing, and because of the fact they're healing, they're putting up boundaries, but to people around them, they're not aware of the fact that they were hurting to begin with.
Right.
And so why is it all of a sudden like it's, from my perspective, everything was cool 20 minutes ago, and now all of a sudden you like don't want to talk, don't want to like what's going on. But I feel like on the flip side of that boundaries are definitely one of the hardest things to set. And I frequently run into that. I don't know if that's something you deal with. I struggle with boundaries all the time, and part of it's because is that I want to be the nice person. I want to be the person somebody can go to if they need something. I want to be able to be there for people. But then again, you sort of go through the cycle where eventually you hit that, you'll hit a point where physically, mentally, emotionally, you're just exhausted, and you're just like, I literally just need to be left alone for a day, and not, and then that has to be the exact moment that somebody desperately needs you for something, and you're like, oh God, okay,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, boundaries are an art form, and I'm a clinician and I teach boundaries, but everyone still struggles with them because what you're talking about, trying to be nice and people pleasing, that is very much built into most of our culture, especially in the Midwest. And that's actually it's part of a trauma response called fawning, people pleasing, lack of boundaries, kind of being codependent, putting other people's needs before you. Of course, part of that is part of being like a good human, but it's everything exists within a spectrum, right? So, and the other end of the spectrum, it's a fawn trauma response where you're denying your internal like reality, like what you were saying before. Sometimes boundaries don't even have to do, I could talk about this for like 3 hours, but there's different layers of boundaries. So what you're saying is like, in your example, that was like an energetic boundary for yourself. Like you had a hard day, or whoever the situation was, if that wasn't you, this person has had a hard day and they're just out of energy and you need to restore yourself. And so it was just an energetic boundary that you know for yourself, like, I'm very tired. And so I'm going to make this promise to myself that I'm going to rest today. I'm going to rest today. That's a boundary for myself. So it doesn't even, in your example, that didn't even have to do with who the person was or anything. It was just more of yours. So we need to have those levels of different boundaries: personal boundaries, energetic boundaries, career boundaries, all levels of boundaries we need to put into place, and they can change. So that's a really, really hard thing, is boundaries should be a very dynamic, not a static process. So I was just talking with someone, another provider, about this today, and saying that even within the same day, you can energetically just tap into yourself and be like, wait a minute, what was a yes an hour ago is now a no for me. It's now a no for me because I have new information about myself and the situation that this isn't going to work. I am a very somatically inclined practitioner and person, so I'm asking my body all the time, like, where are you, boo? Like, where I'm asking myself, like, where are you okay? Because I have a very stressful job, and I will go into situations where I am depleted afterwards, and it has nothing to do with anyone around me. It's just for me to be rested and restored the next day or the next couple of days. I cannot, anything that would seem like quote unquote normal, it's just like, I got to take a break here. This was really, really hard. And you may notice that you need to have certain boundaries around certain people, certain conversations, certain triggers, certain environments, and that's all individual to you. Boundaries create a space. You're saying no to that right now to say yes to something else, yes to your healing. So they exist within a spectrum too. And we also need to be soft with our boundaries too. It's hard with individuals when you're using boundaries with individuals that have none, that don't have any boundaries, and they will keep coming at you and throwing things at you. And it's very, very difficult. And so this is why people end up not using boundaries and giving in, because sometimes for some people in some family systems, there's just no boundaries whatsoever. And that becomes very, very difficult. And so that's where boundary help with like a provider is really, really helpful, so that you can practice it with like someone like me or a coach or a therapist or whoever that is, so that when that situation arises, then you can speak automatically. Now, that's not going to be easy. You're going to be probably shaking and nervous and sweaty and worried that you hurt the other person's feeling. But ultimately, boundaries over time are going to give you space for you to heal. And boundaries are an ultimate act of respect for the other person. That's the other thing that is missed. Because let's say in your situation that you did say, okay, I'm going to show up for this person. Well, you're showing up for this person that's in desperate need of help, but you're showing up exhausted, depleted, annoyed. You don't want to be there. Is that the best situation for that person to be in?
Right.
No, it's not. So it's a greatest act of respect for the other person that you can give, but they're greatly misunderstood by our society. Even our friends and family are going to misinterpret boundaries, because when I listen to my body and I'm asking it, where are you at, boo? It might change. It might change from minute to minute. When I'm just like, okay, now I have new information. I'm actually really tired. Now that I took a breath and I rested inside myself, I'm actually really, really tired. I need a moment here. And so we have to use boundaries with ourselves, and first and foremost. So that's where I would suggest anyone to start. That, and with work, especially while everyone's at home right now. If they're doing work from home, I mean, the greatest places where you can start to use boundaries are with yourself, and then like at work, especially if you're working from home. Don't work 24/7. That's not
Right. Work to live, don't live to work. Another term that I've run across and you using before is a term called ancestral trauma,
Mhm.
and that has me just like the concept of it has me fascinated. So I definitely had it written down to ask you about that.
Yeah, I mean, we have running within us like 14 generations of DNA, prior to us existing. And that our DNA gets turned, passed down and through the womb. And I work with a lot of women or families before they get pregnant to turn off some of the trauma that is expressing in their child or would express in their child. And you can do this through a therapy, or you can do it through integrative medicine. There's so many ways that you can do this. And so it's kind of that intergenerational is ancestral trauma, but there is other traumas that live within cultures that you can assume that are there that we do have to heal. So that's part that people don't really like to hear this message, that you have to work through layers of trauma. And to me, there's like 4 layers. Is your individual trauma, the stuff that's happened during your lifetime that you've experienced, whether you remember it or not. Your body, your tissues, your viscera, everything, the way that you are remembers. Your body remembers. Your body keeps a score. We remember trauma whether or not your mind remembers it or not. Our brains actually shut down in traumatic instances, and so you may not remember. That's just kind of how our brains work. So we have to go through that individual that. Then there's like family of origin or intergenerational. So the next generation and the one before that. So that's intergenerational stuff that's happening within your family system. Just because it happens doesn't mean it's normal. It can look like personality traits within the family where it's actually a trauma response that's just been passed down. So that's that next level. And so healing that next level is really, really hard, especially at family gatherings when people are actually really serious about healing. Then there's collective traumas, things that we cultures will experience, things like a pandemic. There's cultural, just different source of layers of trauma that, like refugees are going to experience a cultural trauma. Individuals that were captured and enslaved to come here, that's a cultural collective trauma that we're dealing with right now, that's been unearthed during the midst of a pandemic, even though it existed for 400 plus years. So that's a collective level of trauma that kind of exists. So these are things that we inherit just as in the human species, but then there's certain cultural components that collectively can be experienced. I talk mostly about racism and ableism as far as like traumas, collective experiences. And then there's like planetary experiences, earth trauma, the stuff that we're doing to the environment. We have to really work through these layers in order to get to like what we do to ourselves, what we do to our families, we're also doing to our environment. Here's a case in point. Rockford, Illinois, where you and I kind of grew up, is kind of a rough place to be. It's the 9th most deadly city in the United States. When I drive there from Iowa, I look out the window, and I had one of the last times that I had driven there, it was just so, the image that I saw on the ground was just so reflective of the community that lives near Rockford. So the snow had melted, and there was just trash spread all over the median of the highway, just piles and piles and piles of trash. And this is something that in Iowa, where we're a little bit more, it's more of a farming community. A lot of individuals came from farms, and then they go to college, and then they get jobs in the big city of Des Moines. And there's a little bit more of a cultural connection and ties, where in Rockford, it doesn't seem like there's that. The contrast in like a 5-hour drive is like, oh my God, like I would not see that in Des Moines, just piles of trash everywhere. So that planetary trauma, and there's such a dense body of trauma. Just if you look at the history of Rockford and look at to how individuals came to Rockford and moved up in the 1950s or, after coming up to the manufacturing. And because there's a lot of manufacturing facilities there, but then they all closed down. So that contributed to the intergenerational trauma and poverty that's in Rockford. So it's that planetary trauma that then bleeds back down. And so these things are all interrelated. So when people go on this trauma healing journey, they think, oh, it's just about me. Well, is it? Because it's about how we're all interconnected with one another as well.
And that's so true. Gosh, you look at, it was always interesting, the cultural shift that happened studying history. It took place in Europe after the bubonic plague. Of course, the bubonic plague was massive and, killed, I don't remember how many millions of people, which right as that wound down was then followed by the Renaissance, and it was interesting the way, like, whether you were Christian, whether you were Jew, whether you were Muslim, whether you lived in Italy or Spain or what would become Germany, that was something that in a way they all dealt with, and it left its mark, to the point where you can even look back today and look at culturally the shifts that took place, everything from, gosh, architecture to art to dress to clothing to everything. And I think you're absolutely right. I think it's going to be really interesting looking back on this 20, 40 years from now, what we went through in 2020 and sort of the effect, because we talk about now, I remember, and you probably had to too, I don't know, it was like high school or college, you'd have some project where it was like talking about the Great Depression. Well, go interview your grandparents, ask them about it. And then I remember doing that, and some of the stories you'd hear, you'd be like, man, that is crazy. So I'm waiting for the day one of my grandkids comes and asks me about the coronavirus pandemic of 2020, I'm like, well, we mostly got through it with weed, or not weed, but memes, and that's crazy. So one of the things that I have noticed that you've made several posts on is psychedelic therapy, and that I'm really, really interested in, because I've kind of noticed that there was like, you and I sort of growing up, as long as millions of kids, we were always subjected to the DARE campaigns and the, just say no to drugs, as Nancy Reagan used to love to say. And sort of culturally and societally speaking in America, there was this like mindset of all drugs are bad. They are like the worst thing you can do. It's against the law. It will mess up your life. Don't go anywhere near it. Don't touch it. Don't talk to people who do it. There was such a heavy taboo placed upon it. Laughingly now, I kind of think about how, like, medicinal marijuana and even recreational marijuana has become legalized, and what a shift that is from even just like 20 years ago. Right. I mean, granted, it was over 20. It was like 93 or 94. I don't even remember this, but when Dr. Dre came out with the album The Chronic, and here's the CD with this big marijuana leaf on it, you had to keep that thing hid in your closet, man. You couldn't let your parents find out that you had that. That was just so taboo and so bad. And now I can go to the gas station and they've got edibles.
Yeah, where you're at, for sure.
Right. So anyway, back to my original question about psychedelic therapy. Please tell me more.
So psychedelics have been with us since the beginning. Ever since they were actually, I forget the name of the book. I was just trying to look it up the other day, but there was this historian that did like a 12-year study, and I'll have to figure out what the name of this book is so I can post about it. We did a 12-year study and traced back ancient sacred medicines to religious ceremonies. And so even before even written texts, these were in religious ceremonies, psychedelics in wine, and women were running these ceremonies. And then they were taken out of a religion so that men could run religious sex. And it was kind of taken away. So there's been periods, even since the very beginning, even since the recorded tests were psychedelics were taken out of the mainstream. And so then it was like the 60s and 70s with Timothy Leary, and I've got all these psychedelic books over here, like over here, Breaking Open the Head, and tripping. All these books over here. Um, and even with young, I've got all these books over here. So it was Timothy Leary in the Harvard psychedelic renaissance in like the 60s and 70s, and then the war on drugs happened, and so it had to go underground. So these substances, these medicines have still been with us. They've just gone underground. Because of the Nixon administration, they manufactured the war on drugs to primarily put Black and brown boys into prison for the school to prison pipeline. And so it was just a marketing campaign to lock up generations of Black fathers primarily. And so marijuana sentences, drugs that were used in Black communities were given harsher sentences than cocaine that was used in white communities.
Really?
And this was very intentionally done. And this is, if you look for it, folks, you can look up the Nixon administration. It's not like secret information. It's very much public knowledge. Now, I grew up in the convergence of the 80s and 90s where there was like those commercials where this is your brain on drugs. They'd crack an egg and fry it up and say, any questions? It was supposed to scare you. You know, so I had that, and I also grew up in a religious cult up until age 13, and so it wasn't even like being able to have access to TV. Like I wasn't even allowed to do that. So the hilarity that I'm doing this work in the middle of the Midwest with my upbringing is just, I think it's hysterical. But it's a lot like a lot of individuals in the Midwest that are seeking out care for their mental health conditions where they haven't been able to get treated. So right now, with all that being said, psychedelics never went away. They've just gone underground. And there are some legal retreats and churches. There, if you get a church status, you can have like an ayahuasca ceremony. Primarily, this is happening in the coast. You know, California is a big state. Colorado has some like cannabis therapy and some other psychedelics therapies there that are legal. And then Oregon just decriminalized everything. But they're having to work on the legalities there. So I get messages every single weekend. My email blows up because I'm listed on these listservs as being a provider. And people thinking that I can be a sitter or guide or get them substances. They really aren't understanding the legality of the situation, especially with books like Michael Pollan's book that came out. There's just more interest and there's more information in this area, thank goodness, because there's more safety information. But at the same time, I'm really filling in a safety and a harm reduction gap, because what happens is most people will go out of the country, or they will go underground, or they will do these substances and medicines at home, and they will not think about their mental health state. They don't have any of the information, and sometimes it can be a really rough ride. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of my work is to educate and to really ground someone on the other side when they're having a really hard time coming from non-ordinary reality to the shared plane that we all exist within. So I've gotten advanced training in this. I'm the only provider in 7 Midwestern states. That is, it's really sad. Really sad. I've never taken more heat for anything I've ever done in my career than standing up for this. But I mean,
I like amongst colleagues.
Yeah.
They just still stuck in the old ways, or what's?
Yeah, it's very much. It's just kind of this new. There are colleagues that are very, very excited about. They just can't do it publicly because they're at an agency. They're stuck. They're still stuck. My colleagues are still stuck in that mind frame of these are drugs. These are bad. But obviously, my colleagues have also seen the worst of the worst situations, right? And so without any support or education or any unlearning on their own end, that's kind of where they're at. So any sort of drug is only, it's not good or bad. LSD by itself is not good or bad. It is it is just what it is. It's the label and the connotation that we as humans put on something, whether it's medicinal or whether it's not. So you have to do your own decent amount of unlearning as being a provider. But yeah, in this area, I'm providing right now, I would just call it harm reduction on the front side. So helping someone plan out their journey, do it safely, line up their mental health state with a medicine, making sure that they have setting down intention, making sure that they have a plan, you know, all of these things on the front side, because where I'm at in the Midwest, there isn't, nothing is legal. We don't even have recreational marijuana legal here. I mean, we just legalized medical marijuana for PTSD. I mean, we're in Iowa ranks dead last in mental health services, 50 out of 50 states. We're at the very bottom. So we're very much stuck in some older models here. So this is kind of where some of the pushback is. And quite honestly, not a lot of people have the training. I'm lucky because I have integrative medicine training for mental health, which includes entheogens, which includes plant medicine. Like I will prescribe CBD, you know, and I am very much on board with that, versus my other mental health colleagues. They don't have the training that I have, and know that how medicinal things can be. And they have training in what they have training in. And so it's just my niche and my specialty is that. And so on the other end, I love the integration work. I love working with someone and talking about their experiences, because our soul and our psyche speaks in symbols. And so I like kind of drawing that out of the person to change their life for the better. And it's always there. Even a difficult experience has profound amounts of wisdom in it. And so I love it, because I'm a big fan of individuals being able to be in charge of their healing at at the highest levels that they can be. And so I attract a lot of individuals, a lot of men, to mental health, engaging and talking about mental health, that would never ever engage with a mental health professional ever in any capacity whatsoever. They would have never gone to therapy. You know, they would have never talked about their difficulty with another person. They were just going to suck it up for the rest of their lives. So I love that this is such a modality that is bipartisan. I mean, I've got Trump supporters, Biden supporters, people that don't vote, spiritual folks. I mean, all across the board, that conspiracy theorists, they're all attracted to this modality. And I love working with just the diversity of people that are pro, hey, I'd like to not feel like shit. I'd like to not have flashbacks and be up all night, terrorized by this traumatic experience, or terrorized by how much I'm in pain. Mm-hmm. So I love that. I'm one for, are psychedelics for everyone? No. Is marijuana for everyone? Cannabis for everyone? No. But I'm for all modalities on the table for all people, because I think that people have suffered enough, and they deserve to have whatever the research says, whatever MAPS is saying, like this works, like that should be an option for folks. Mm-hmm. That has to be an option for folks.
Well, that's good. Gosh, that's really good to hear. It was one of the, I'm all about normalizing mental health, especially in men, because that's you know, one of the hardest things is that, and not saying that, you know, mental health impacts everybody. But, you know, for men, for generations, it's been suck it up, quit being a pussy. Nobody wants to hear it. We all got problems. Shut up. Just bury that down deep and don't ever bring it up again. Right. You know, and that can turn into, I think, just like you were saying, like, you know, intergenerational trauma where you're just constantly suppressing, be stoic, move on. You know, it was, don't show weakness. all that kind of stuff. And then eventually you get to the point where, at least, me, you're like, God, I really need to talk to somebody. It'd be really nice to just, you get to the point where you feel like you're walking around with 3 pallets of bricks on your shoulders.
You do.
You know, so that is, to me, that's phenomenal to hear that you have that many reaching out, and I'm not going to say his name because I realize it's a personal thing, but and I think I told you about this, is the first time you were on the podcast. A couple months later, I had a listener who reached out to me and said, hey, just want to let you know, after I listened to your podcast with Shannon, it really got me thinking. I started doing some research. I found a local therapist. We've been talking a couple times a week, and I feel like I've completely turned my life around. And that was really, really awesome to hear. So hats off to you, obviously, for coming on the podcast, for the first time. And at the very least, we know one person is progressing and doing better. And I like to say that to anyone. I am by no means, obviously, a professional. I'm more than willing to listen to anybody talk. But, if you feel like you've got some weight on you, if you feel like you've got some stuff bothering you, and I think everybody does to some degree or another, find a professional, reach out to somebody. There are so many, I feel like, and I've realized this more and more and more following you on social media, like how many new avenues are beginning to open up and new understandings about where a lot of this stuff comes from. There are even a lot of things that, minor things about myself that I didn't even realize till I read one of your posts and went, oh, okay, that kind of makes sense. That actually kind of makes a heck of a lot of sense. So yeah, my hat's off to you in that regard. Where this is going to feel like I'm taking like a bizarre turn here, just completely segueing into something
weird.
Where is the community at in the whole like ADHD thing? Because it felt like that was like a pandemic in the 90s. Like every kid had ADD. I was diagnosed with it. Were you?
Yep.
Yeah. See, it's two of us. What? I don't know. Do you have any kind of like background on that? Is it how that happened and where we're at currently with that? And
so I've done like podcasts and training all about just ADHD in the 90s. So I was recently on another podcast, which if you guys go to any of my social media, you can listen to that podcast, because it was the same with him too. He got diagnosed with us as well. It was just one of the hot new diagnosis in the 1990s. So a lot of us were getting diagnosed with it. And with ADHD, it's still one that's very contested. Is it real? Is it not? Okay, so I'm not going to get into that because that's above my pay grade. I'm not in the American Psychological Association. I'm not writing out the DSM codes for ADHD. I mean, obviously, I see that it exists. I've worked with so many kids and families and adults with ADHD. It looks different culturally, and you need to look at it with a trauma-informed lens. I was experiencing childhood trauma, and so I should have been cared for in a different way. I actually have OCD and anxiety, and was experiencing, levels of abuse, and got diagnosed with ADHD. So part of my healing has been creating an ADHD protocol that's trauma-informed for kids and adults, because there, it also exists with so many co-occurring conditions. So ADHD 2/3 of the time has a co-occurring other mental health condition. And so it needs to be treated with those layers. So there's a lot that it was hot in the 90s. It continues to be, I do believe it's a real condition that can be treated with integrative medicine, that I do treat all of the time with integrative medicine. There's a ton of roots there, but it does look very different. I have a whole thing on how it looks different culturally. And trauma needs to be ruled out, because trauma can look like inattention. Anxiety can look like inattention, depression, which are co-occurring. You can have more than one mental health condition. Like that's a real thing too. So it's just determining, what's going on. I get into it. Like I see a lot of misdiagnosis in my practice. I like to know what's actually going on for the person.
That could make a lot of sense, because if you're talking about ADD, attention deficit disorder, So the child is having problems pay attention.
Yeah.
Is it literally just because they have problems paying attention, or is there something else going on that's causing them to not be able to pay attention? And therefore, yeah, I can see that. Now that you say it,
They're
that
worried
makes
about
sense.
their next meal. They're worried if, if their parent is going to be abused. They've just experienced gun violence. They haven't been sleeping. They're homeless. They're moving around. I mean, so it's tough because what happens in like school settings is this child is bouncing around in the classroom, So why are they bouncing around? Why are we all
Right.
sitting in desks and the child's 6 years old? The whole how school is versus for someone who with ADHD, to me too, I have to rule out, is this person a kinesthetic learner, a hands-on learner? Oh, they're a
Mhm.
hands-on learner. They don't have ADHD. They just need to move around.
Right.
They learn by doing. And
Hmm.
so it's like ruling in and ruling out some of these very basic things. Oh, this kid's been up all night with the screen in his face and the sleep is out of whack. Okay, is that ADHD to me? So for me, as like a root cause type of a clinician, it's like, what's going on here?
Hmm.
What are they eating? What's their family like? I just kind of poke around. What's happening here? Not to discount that ADHD is real or not real, but sometimes it's, to me, I look at it in an opposite kind of a way. It's like, oh, there's a circadian rhythm imbalance. Oh, this is trauma. Oh, this is hypoglycemia. Oh, this is a food issue. This is like a food intolerance. Oh, there's low nutrients and vitamins.
Mm.
Oh, this is a learning style. That can look like ADHD. Someone else may diagnose it as that, but I might not.
Right. Well, and I always wondered about this, and I haven't gotten my PhD yet, and I'm not gonna. But I sort of felt like looking back on it, there was sort of this like weird convergence that this is just my theory, that could have led to this rash of ADD diagnosis. Is that our generation was sort of like one of the first generations that was coming of age with all kinds of new technologies.
Yeah.
There were all these new TVs, there were Game Boys, there were Nintendos, video games, MTV, all this kind of stuff going on. And yet at the same time, the schools that we were attending, the curriculums and the setup were still like in this 1950s model of you sit at your desk and there's a chalkboard and you take notes all day long. And you have these children, this is the way I felt, where I felt like I was coming into school and I had all these things going on in my brain of everything that was out there and everything that was going on. And then I just had to like sit still
Doesn't
or
make
I
any
was
sense.
bad.
Mm-hmm.
And you're
Yeah.
looking out the window and you're just vibrating like a pile of molecules. Like, why am I here? Why am I sitting here?
Right.
There's stuff to do. There's more fun stuff to think
Mm-hmm.
about and experience. And
Mm-hmm.
and I always wondered if that didn't have a lot to do with that happening as well. And
Mm-hmm.
it feels like, and I look at my kids now, and you're probably the same way, is that yes, there's still, I mean, of course, you take pandemic out of this thing, but they still go to school and they still have to learn their stuff like English and math. I mean, that's understanding. But the way they break up the day is so much more interesting now. The way there's more hands-on activities, the way there's more motion and fluidity and integration of those technologies into the classroom. We thought it was awesome if we got a VHS tape for a class.
Right.
You remember that? That was usually a substitute teacher day, but
Overhead projector. Oh my gosh. Yeah,
that just meant you could nap in the back of class because the lights were low.
exactly. Lights are low.
Well, all right. Well, I feel like we could go on and on forever. So we'll definitely have to have you on sometime. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're watching this, if you're hearing this, by all means, look up Shannon Myers, the Integrative Counselor, Facebook, Instagram. Do you do Twitter?
I'm on Twitter. Roots counselor.
Roots Counselor on Twitter. Look
Yeah.
that up. I haven't. I'm so terrible with Twitter. I feel like I
Oh,
get
I'm
on.
random. I'm random on it. It's like I'll tweet like once a week, and I don't know. I'm not on
Yeah.
much.
I guess it's because, well, I feel like like Twitter is so much more networking that it's sort of like I'll get on there. I'll be like, man, I haven't been on Twitter in like 6 months, and I'll get on there, and for like a week, I'm like, yeah, I'm really gonna get on this Twitter thing. And then you post like 5 things, and nobody likes it or anything, and then you're kind of like, why am I doing this again? Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
just go back to my Instagram. That's where I belong anyway. So. Well, once again, I want to thank you so very much for coming on. And then outside of that, I'll give the floor to you if you've got anything you want to say to people on the way out.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in the Rockford area, my sister-in-law owns Resilience Counseling in Rockford, Illinois, and there's 3 practitioners there. So if you're looking to reach out, they do children, they work with children and families as well. The reason that I do these, I mean, neither uh, James or I were not making any money from this. He just got off work. I've been working all day. The whole point of this is really to normalize mental health and to reach out and trying to make myself accessible, show you that I'm a real human being, just are all my colleagues as well. If you are in a like a crisis situation, or you don't have any you don't have therapy insurance, you can text home, HOME, just text that word to 741-741. That's a free crisis text line. You can call, you can text for any kind of reason. If you're anxious, if you're depressed, you're suicidal, if you're just, you don't know what to do in a situation, you can text any time of day or night. On my Instagram, I have other resources for teens or vets that are free resources as well. If you're interested in doing integrative medicine, and looking at your root causes, you can reach out to me and get a hold of me there. I do work across all 50 states with integrative medicine for mental health, and all of my services are trauma informed. I also do psychedelic integration, which we talked about. I'm also a Reiki practitioner and then a consultant. So if you're a clinician and you're wanting to consult, I have some providers across the country that they'll batch together some of their clients to, so that they don't have to go back to school and do what I'm doing, but they can talk to me about their client populations, and I can give you some tips and tricks to work with your clients. I'm also a systems change consultant, and I will help train and educate anyone who is willing to hear me educate. I'm not the best, but I am excited about the work. I love it. It is my purpose and reason for being.
Fantastic. I concur with absolutely 100% everything you said. You're not getting any disagreements from me. And I try and tell people, I talked about earlier in the podcast, I try and tell people all the time, there's nothing wrong with admitting you got a problem. There's nothing wrong with admitting you need help. There's nothing wrong with admitting you need to talk to someone.
Right.
Um, the amount of times I've heard, man, I wish I would have done this sooner.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, get on it. You only got so many years on this earth. Try
Mm-hmm.
to make them as enjoyable as you can, and don't waste your time carrying something that you could begin working on right now.
No, I mean, you don't get a sticker for suffering the most. Like you don't get
Hmm.
a reward for that. But there's always ways to reduce that level of suffering, and that's what we're both talking about. I do these so that hopefully someone will engage in the healing process at some level.
Hmm. I agree. Well, I love it. I love you. I want to thank you for coming on once again, and I have absolutely no doubt that we'll be in touch in the future.
Sounds great. Thank you.
All
Thanks.
right. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.